When Kaya woke up that morning, knee-deep in alien teenage drama wasn't exactly how she'd planned to spend her day. But here she was, crouched behind a ventilation grate on Level 9 of Harmony Point Station, watching what could only be described as the most spectacular educational meltdown this side of the Andromeda Spiral. Before we begin, YouTube shows me that 93% of you haven't subscribed yet. Subscribing is free, it really supports our community, and I'd love for you to be part of it. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. The Galactic Youth Academy was supposed to be a shining beacon of interspecies cooperation, a place where young beings from across the known galaxy came to learn diplomacy, science, and the fine art of not starting intergalactic wars over lunch preferences. Instead, what Kaya was witnessing looked more like a furry rebellion that would make any historical revolutionary proud. 5 young Veltharians, the feline-like species known for their grace, dignity, and unfortunately for everyone involved today, their stubborn streak, sat in the middle of the Academy's main hall wearing absolutely nothing but their natural fur and defiant expressions. Their pristine Academy uniforms lay scattered around them like casualties of some textile battlefield. This is completely unacceptable. Commander Kalmoth's voice echoed through the hall. His reptilian features flushed a deeper shade of green than usual. The poor instructor looked like he was one tantrum away from molting from stress. The Galactic Council inspection is in 3 days. 3 days! The largest of the cubs, a female with striking silver-striped fur who was clearly the ringleader, lifted her chin with the kind of regal disdain that would make royalty jealous. "We will not wear those prisoner garments, Commander," Nixara declared, her tail lashing behind her with righteous indignation. Kaya had to admire the kid's conviction, even if her timing was absolutely terrible. Lieutenant Voxara, Kalmoth's assistant, stepped forward with the kind of diplomatic smile that fooled absolutely no one. "Now, young ones, surely we can reach a reasonable compromise." "No compromise." This came from Veltano, a stocky male cub whose fur was practically bristling with determination. "These uniforms are an insult to our heritage. They restrict our movement, hide our natural beauty, and smell like... He wrinkled his nose in disgust. Like bureaucracy." Well, the kid wasn't wrong about that last part. Kaya had been around enough government facilities to know that particular scent, a mixture of processed air, recycled hope, and the dreams of mid-level administrators. The smallest cub, Felgen, sat quietly at the edge of the group, his golden fur dulled with what looked suspiciously like homesickness. While his companions raged against the textile machine, he simply stared at the uniform in his small paws, with an expression that tugged at something in Kaya's chest. "Perhaps," came another voice, smooth and diplomatic in the way that made Kaya's teeth itch, "we should consider alternative approaches to this situation." A tall, graceful being from the Ethereal collective glided into the scene, their translucent form shimmering with what Kaya assumed was meant to be calming energy. The Ethereals were known for their wisdom, their patience, and their absolute inability to understand that sometimes teenagers just needed to throw a good tantrum before they'd listen to reason. "Young Veltharians," the Ethereal continued in tones so soothing they probably came with a sedative warning, "consider the harmony of the universe. Your uniforms are but threads in the great tapestry of... Stuff the tapestry." Nixara's screech could have shattered crystal. "We're not threads. We're not cogs in your machine. We're Veltharians, and we have names and stories and families who raised us to be proud of who we are." The Ethereal flickered, which in their species was roughly equivalent to a dramatic gasp. They retreated with wounded dignity, muttering something about aggressive energy patterns and therapeutic crystal recommendations. Next came a Bruthan engineer, one of those hulking, practical species who believed every problem could be solved with the right tool and enough force. He stomped into the hall carrying what looked like a portable clothing dispenser. "Simple solution," he announced, his voice like gravel in a cement mixer. "Automated dressing unit. Cubs go in naked, come out uniformed, problem solved." The cubs took one look at the contraption, which resembled nothing so much as a mechanical car wash with delusions of grandeur, and collectively hissed. Even quiet little Felgin managed a respectable snarl. "You want to stuff us into a machine?" Morgin, the protective older brother type, stepped forward with his claws extended. "Try it, Rockbrain. See what happens." The Bruthan engineer, who had probably never met a problem he couldn't hammer into submission, looked genuinely puzzled by this resistance to his obviously brilliant solution. He packed up his mechanical monstrosity with the air of someone who just couldn't understand why everyone else was being so difficult. Kaya watched this parade of failures with growing fascination. She'd been sent here to repair a faulty atmospheric recycling unit, a simple job that should have taken an hour, tops. Instead, she'd stumbled into what was apparently the greatest diplomatic crisis since the Sandwich Wars of Sector 9. The funny thing was, everyone was treating this like a behavioral problem. Like these kids were just being difficult for the sake of it, the way teenagers had been since the dawn of civilization on every planet that had bothered to invent angst. But Kaya had grown up in enough different places, worn enough different uniforms, military, civilian, corporate, and otherwise, to recognize something else in the cubs' defiance. This wasn't rebellion. This was fear. "Commander Kalmoth," came yet another voice, this one dripping with the kind of authority that made everyone in the room straighten up whether they wanted to or not. "What exactly is the nature of this disruption?" The newcomer was a Zalaxian official, their multiple arms gesticulating in what Kaya recognized as barely contained bureaucratic fury. The Zalaxians ran most of the galaxy's educational systems with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine and the compassion of a tax audit. "Educational supervisor," Kalmoth stammered, his tongue flicking out nervously. "It's merely a small cultural adjustment issue. Nothing that can't be resolved before the inspection, I assure you." The Zalaxians' primary eyes fixed on the naked cubs, while their secondary eyes scanned the scattered uniforms with the precision of a military inventory. "Cultural adjustment issue? These juveniles are in violation of Code 1138B, proper institutional attire requirements. The penalties for non-compliance include academic probation, cultural sensitivity, re-education, and possible expulsion." At the word expulsion, little Felgin's ears flattened against his head, and Kaya caught the glimmer of tears in his large eyes. The other cubs closed ranks around him protectively, their earlier bravado tempered by the reality of consequences. "With respect, Supervisor," Nixara said, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her tail, "we cannot wear clothing that strips us of our identity. It is not who we are." "Identity," the Zalaxian repeated, as if the word tasted like something unpleasant they'd found stuck to their shoe. "Identity is irrelevant to education. Conformity breeds efficiency. Efficiency breeds success. Success breeds more bureaucrats," Kaya muttered under her breath, finally abandoning her hiding spot behind the ventilation grate. She'd heard enough. Every head in the room turned toward her as she stood up, tool belt jangling with the everyday symphony of a working person in a room full of theorists and administrators. She was suddenly very aware that she was just a human maintenance engineer in a space full of important people with important titles dealing with important problems. But sometimes, Kaya reflected, being unimportant was exactly the right qualification for the job. "Excuse me," Commander Kolmoth said, his voice climbing toward the register that suggested incoming panic. "But this is a restricted educational area. Maintenance personnel are not authorized to—" "Oh, I'm just here to fix your air recycler," Kaya said cheerfully, holding up her work order with the kind of casual authority that came from years of walking into places where she technically didn't belong. "But I couldn't help noticing you've got a bit of a situation here." The Zalaxian's multiple eyes swiveled toward her with the mechanical precision of weapon systems acquiring a target. "This matter does not concern civilian maintenance staff. Please complete your assigned tasks and remove yourself from this facility." "Right, sure, absolutely," Kaya nodded agreeably. "Just one quick question, though." She looked around the room at all the frustrated adults and the defiant cubs. "Has anybody actually asked these kids why they won't wear the uniforms?" The silence that followed was the kind you usually heard right before someone admitted they'd accidentally started a war over a translation error. Commander Kolmoth's tongue flicked out again. "Well, they've made their position quite clear. They find the uniforms objectionable." "Uh-huh." Kaya looked at the cubs, who were watching her with the wary curiosity of young animals encountering something they couldn't quite categorize as threat or ally. "And how long have they been away from their home world?" "This is their first semester," Lieutenant Voxara supplied helpfully. "They arrived 6 weeks ago." 6 weeks. Kaya nodded thoughtfully. "And before that, they lived with their families, wore their own clothes, ate their own food, slept in their own beds, surrounded by people who looked like them and smelled like them and knew all their names and stories and favorite things." The cub's ears had all pricked forward now, and even Felgen was looking at her with something that might have been hope. Now they're here, light years from home, surrounded by strangers, eating processed nutrition cubes, sleeping in generic dormitories, and somebody wants them to put on identical uniforms that make them look like everyone else and smell like industrial cleaner. Kaya shrugged. "Honestly, I'm surprised they lasted 6 weeks before staging a naked protest." The Zalaxian drew themselves up to their full, impressive height. "Homesickness is not an acceptable excuse for violating institutional standards. These juveniles must learn to adapt to proper civilized behavior." "Oh, absolutely," Kaya agreed. "They definitely need to learn to wear the uniforms. No argument there." She paused, looking around the room. "But maybe the question isn't how to force them into the clothes. Maybe it's how to help them want to put them on." Commander Kolmoth's head tilted in the reptilian equivalent of confusion. "I'm not certain I understand the distinction." Kaya grinned. "Well, Commander, that's where it gets interesting." What happened next was, frankly, the kind of bureaucratic miracle that usually required divine intervention, or at least a really good bribe. Commander Kolmoth, faced with the choice between letting a human maintenance worker try something unorthodox or explaining to his superiors why his academy was shut down due to naked teenagers, chose the path of desperate pragmatism. "You have until the end of today," he told Kaya, his voice carrying the weight of a being who had officially run out of conventional options. "If your approach fails, we proceed with mandatory compliance protocols." The Zalaxian supervisor made a sound like a filing cabinet having an existential crisis but reluctantly agreed to the temporary arrangement. Apparently, even cosmic bureaucrats occasionally recognized when they were witnessing something that might actually work. As the parade of frustrated authority figures filed out, muttering about proper procedures and unprecedented irregularities, Kaya found herself alone, with 5 very suspicious young Veltharians. The silence stretched between them like a bridge nobody was quite ready to cross. "So," Nixara said finally, her silver-striped tail twitching with barely contained aggression, "the human thinks she can succeed where everyone else has failed?" "The human has a name," Kaya replied mildly, settling cross-legged on the floor at what she hoped was a non-threatening distance. "And honestly, I have absolutely no idea if I can help. But I figure it can't hurt to try talking to you like you're actual people instead of problems to be solved." Zafika, the quiet observer of the group, tilted her head with feline curiosity. "You want to talk to us?" "Revolutionary concept, I know." Kaya pulled a nutrition bar from her tool belt and unwrapped it with the casual efficiency of someone who ate lunch wherever she happened to be working. "Mind if I ask how you ended up here? At the academy, I mean." The cubs exchanged glances, the kind of wordless communication that happened between people who'd been thrown together by circumstances beyond their control and had learned to rely on each other. "Our families," Veltano said slowly, "sent us here for the honor of it. To learn from other species, to bring knowledge back to our world." His ears flattened slightly. "They were so proud when we were accepted." "But they didn't tell you about the uniforms," Kaya guessed. "They told us many things," Morgan said, his protective instincts evident in the way he positioned himself between Kaya and the smaller cubs. "About the learning, about the other species we'd meet, about the adventures we'd have. Nobody mentioned that we'd have to stop being ourselves to fit in." Kaya took a thoughtful bite of her nutrition bar, which tasted like cardboard with delusions of being food. "What does being yourself mean to you?" The question seemed to catch them off guard. Adults, apparently, didn't often ask teenage Veltharians for philosophical input. Nixara was the first to answer, her voice carrying the passion of someone who'd been thinking about this for weeks. "It means being able to move freely, without restriction. It means showing our patterns, our individual markings that tell our family history. It means," she struggled for words, "it means not being ashamed of what we are." "The uniforms make us all look the same," Zafika added quietly. "Like we don't matter as individuals, like we're just interchangeable parts." Little Felgen, who had been silent through most of the conversation, suddenly spoke up with the clarity that sometimes came from the youngest members of any group. "My grandmother used to help me get dressed every morning. She would brush my fur and tell me stories about my great ancestors while she worked. The uniform doesn't know my stories." And there it was, the heart of the problem, laid bare by a homesick kid who missed his grandmother's morning routine. Kaya felt something shift in her chest, the same feeling she got when she finally identified the root cause of a particularly stubborn mechanical problem. "Felgen," she said gently, "what if the uniform could know your stories? What if putting it on could be part of honoring your great ancestors instead of forgetting them?" The young cub's ears pricked forward with interest, and Kaya knew she was on the right track. "Here's the thing," she continued, addressing the whole group now. "Humans have been wearing uniforms for thousands of generations. Military uniforms, work uniforms, ceremonial dress, all kinds of clothes that make us look similar to each other. And you know what we learned? They were all listening now. Even Nixara's tail had stopped its aggressive lashing. We learned that the uniform doesn't erase who you are. It adds another layer to your identity. When I put on my maintenance coveralls every morning, I don't stop being Kaya. I become Kaya who fixes things. The uniform tells everyone around me that I'm someone they can trust to solve problems. Someone who takes pride in keeping the systems running that keep everyone alive. She gestured toward the scattered academy uniforms. Those clothes? They're not prison garments. They're a signal to everyone you meet that you're students. Young beings who are brave enough to travel across the galaxy to learn new things. They tell the world that you're part of something bigger than yourselves. But they make us all look identical, Veltano protested, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Do they? Kaya asked. Let me tell you about human military dress codes. Every branch of service has the same basic uniform, right? But look closer, and you'll see rank insignia, unit patches, service ribbons, specialty badges, dozens of small details that tell the story of who that person is and what they've accomplished. The uniform is just the canvas. The individual is the artwork. She stood up and walked over to one of the discarded uniforms, holding it up to the light. Now, I don't know much about Veltharian culture, but I'm willing to bet there are ways to honor your traditions while wearing these clothes. Ways to make them yours instead of just institutional laundry. Zefika crept closer, her natural curiosity overcoming her wariness. What do you mean? Well, Kaya said, warming to the topic, humans have grooming rituals too. We call it getting dressed with intention. Instead of just throwing on clothes, we make it meaningful. We think about who we want to be that day, what we want to accomplish, how we want to present ourselves to the world. She looked around at the 5 cubs, seeing past their defiance to the scared, homesick kids underneath. What if putting on your uniforms could be like armor? Not armor to hide who you are, but armor to protect your mission while you're here, learning and growing. Feljin had moved closer too, drawn by something in Kaya's voice that spoke to the part of him that missed his grandmother's morning care. Could someone help us get dressed? Like a proper ceremony? Absolutely, Kaya said without hesitation. In fact, I think that's exactly what's been missing. Nobody taught you how to wear these uniforms with pride. They just expected you to figure it out on your own. Nixara's expression had shifted from suspicion to something that looked almost like hope. You would do that? Help us learn the proper way? Kid, Kaya grinned. I've spent my entire career figuring out how things are supposed to work when the instruction manual is written in 3 different languages and half the pages are missing. Teaching you how to wear uniforms with dignity? That sounds like exactly the kind of challenge I signed up for. For the first time since the whole crisis began, the cubs looked at their scattered uniforms with something other than revulsion. They looked at them with possibility. There's just one condition, Kaya added, and their ears all flattened with renewed suspicion. You have to trust me. And more importantly, you have to trust that wearing the uniform doesn't mean giving up your culture. It means carrying it with you in a new form. The 5 cubs huddled together in a quick conference, their voices too low for Kaya to hear, but their body language speaking volumes. When they broke apart, it was Nixara who spoke for the group. We accept your help, Kaya, who fixes things, she said formally. Teach us how to wear our armor with honor. And just like that, everything changed. What followed was perhaps the most intensive crash course in cross-cultural fashion consulting that the galaxy had ever witnessed. Kaya, who had exactly zero formal training in either education or alien psychology, found herself conducting what could only be described as a masterclass in the art of making institutional clothing feel like a celebration instead of a surrender. The first step, she decided, was research. Real research, not the kind of superficial cultural briefings that most species got when dealing with others. If she was going to help these kids transform their relationship with their uniforms, she needed to understand what those uniforms were replacing. "Tell me about getting dressed on your home world," she said, settling into what was rapidly becoming her standard cross-legged position on the academy floor. "Walk me through a typical morning." The cubs exchanged those looks again, the ones that said they weren't quite sure if this adult was trustworthy, but were willing to find out. Felgen, emboldened by Kaya's earlier attention to his grandmother's story, spoke first. "Grandmother would wake me before dawn. She'd brush my fur in sections, starting with my face and ears, then working down my back and sides. Each stroke had to be perfect, following the natural pattern of growth. While she worked," Zafika added softly, "she would recite the morning gratitudes. Thanks for the night's rest, for the warmth of family, for the strength to face the day's challenges." "It wasn't just grooming," Nixara said, her voice carrying a note of defiance that suggested she'd been accused of vanity before. "It was preparation, mental and physical. By the time grandmother finished, I felt ready to face anything." Velitano nodded enthusiastically. "And the choosing of accessories. The selection of claw caps for formal occasions, the arrangement of fur ornaments for festivals, the careful application of scent markers that told everyone which family line you belonged to. Everything had meaning," Morjin concluded. "Nothing was random. Every choice was a statement about who you were and what you valued." Kaya absorbed this information with the focused attention she usually reserved for technical manuals. "Okay," she said finally. "So getting dressed wasn't just about covering your bodies. It was a daily ritual that connected you to your family, your history, and your sense of purpose." "Exactly!" Felgen's tail had started to flick with excitement. "But these uniforms, they don't connect us to anything. They just cover us." "Right now, they do," Kaya agreed. "But what if we changed that? What if we created a new ritual? One that honored your traditions while preparing you for your mission here at the Academy?" She stood up and walked over to one of the discarded uniforms, lifting it with the reverence she might show a piece of important equipment. "Humans have a saying, 'Clothes make the man.' But that's not quite right. The truth is, how you put on the clothes makes the person." The cubs watched with growing interest as Kaya began to examine the uniform with professional thoroughness. "Look at this," she said, holding up the jacket. "Standard Academy cut, designed for multiple species compatibility. But look closer. See these adjustment points? They're not just for fit. They're opportunities for personalization within regulation." She demonstrated, showing how the sleeve lengths could be modified, how the collar could be arranged in different configurations, how the belt could be positioned to accommodate species-specific anatomy while still maintaining the overall uniform appearance. "And this," she continued, indicating the fabric itself, "is designed to hold scent markers without permanent staining. Your administrators probably don't even know that feature exists. It was built in by the manufacturers to accommodate species like yours." Nixara's ears had perked up with genuine interest. "You mean we could still carry our family scents?" "Within reason, and probably more subtly than you're used to. But yes." Kaya grinned. "The question is, are you willing to learn a new way of expressing your identity? Or are you so attached to the old ways that you can't adapt to new circumstances? It was a calculated challenge, and it worked. The cubs bristled with the kind of indignation that came from being accused of inflexibility. "We are perfectly capable of adaptation," Nixara declared. "We simply refuse to be erased." "Good," Kaya said, "because I'm not asking you to be erased. I'm asking you to evolve." What happened next was part fashion consultation, part cultural exchange, and part group therapy session. Kaya worked with each cub individually, helping them understand how to wear their uniforms in ways that felt meaningful rather than oppressive. With Feljin, she focused on recreating the meditative aspects of his grandmother's morning routine. She taught him how to arrange the uniform components in a specific order, how to put each piece on with deliberate, grateful movements that echoed the morning gratitudes he missed so much. "Before you put on the jacket," she instructed, "take a moment to think about your grandmother. Thank her for teaching you to value preparation and intention. Then, as you slide your arms into the sleeves, remind yourself that you're putting on the armor of a student, someone brave enough to travel across the galaxy to learn." For Zafika, the quiet observer, Kaya emphasized the uniform's role as protective camouflage, not to hide who she was, but to allow her to move through the academy without constantly having to explain or defend her presence. Sometimes, Kaya explained, fitting in gives you the freedom to stand out when it really matters. Veltano's focus was on the subtle customizations that let him express his personality within regulation. The way he could arrange his collar, the specific knot he could use for his belt, the barely perceptible adjustments that would mark the uniform as distinctly his. "Every great warrior knows their equipment intimately," Kaya told him. "They don't just wear armor, they make it an extension of themselves. Your uniform should feel like that, familiar, comfortable, and uniquely yours." With Morgan, she appealed to his protective instincts. "Your job is to take care of your pack, right? Well, part of taking care of them is making sure they don't get kicked out of the academy for dress code violations. Sometimes protection means making tactical compromises." But it was with Nixara that Kaya faced her biggest challenge. The silver-striped cub had appointed herself the guardian of Veltharian dignity, and she wasn't about to compromise that role for anyone. "You ask us to become something we're not," Nixara said, her voice steady, but edged with the kind of steel that suggested this conversation could go very badly, very quickly. "No," Kaya replied, matching her intensity. "I'm asking you to become something you've never been before. Veltharians in space. Your ancestors never had to figure out how to maintain their culture while living among aliens. They never had to balance tradition with the practical realities of interspecies education. That doesn't make them failures. It makes you pioneers." She gestured around the academy hall, with its soaring architecture designed to accommodate dozens of different species, its carefully regulated atmosphere that allowed everyone to breathe comfortably, its subtle technological marvels that made interspecies cooperation possible. "This place exists because thousands of beings from hundreds of worlds decided that learning from each other was worth the discomfort of adaptation. Your parents sent you here because they believed the same thing. The question is, do you have the courage to honor their faith in you?" Nixara's tail had gone very still. Never a good sign in a Veltharian. For a long moment, Kaya wondered if she'd pushed too hard, challenged too directly. Then, slowly, the young cub reached for her uniform jacket. "Show me," she said quietly. "Show me how to wear this armor, like a Veltharian warrior preparing for the most important battle of her life." And Kaya did. By the time the afternoon shift arrived at the academy, 5 young Veltharians stood in perfect formation, their uniforms immaculate, their bearing proud, and their eyes bright with something that looked very much like hope. They had learned to dress themselves with intention. Now it remained to be seen whether that would be enough. The morning of the inspection dawned with the kind of crystalline clarity that made even recycled station air feel fresh and full of possibility. Kaya arrived at the academy early, her tool belt lighter than usual because she'd left most of her equipment behind. Today, she suspected, her most important tools would be words and, maybe, a little bit of faith. The cubs were already assembled in the main hall, and the sight of them took her breath away. They stood in perfect formation, their uniforms crisp and immaculate, but more importantly, they stood with the kind of quiet dignity that couldn't be faked or forced. Each small adjustment they'd learned, the precise angle of a collar, the careful arrangement of sleeves, the subtle positioning of belts, combined to create something that was unmistakably them while still being completely regulation. "Well," Kaya said, her voice catching slightly with something that might have been pride, "don't you 5 look ready to take on the galaxy?" Felgen beamed at her, his small chest puffed out with the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly who you were and why you were wearing what you were wearing. "Grandmother would be proud," he said solemnly. "She absolutely would," Kaya agreed, and meant it. Commander Kolmoth arrived next, his reptilian features arranged in an expression of cautious optimism that suggested he'd learned not to count his victories before they hatched. He looked the cubs up and down with the critical eye of someone who'd seen too many disasters to fully trust in miracles. "Remarkable," he murmured finally. "Simply remarkable. How did you—" "Trade secret," Kaya said with a grin. "Let's just say it turns out teenagers are basically the same across every species in the galaxy. They just want to feel like they matter." Lieutenant Voxara bustled in with her arms full of data pads and scanning equipment, prepared for every possible inspection emergency. She stopped short when she saw the cubs, her jaw dropping in what Kaya assumed was reptilian amazement. They're actually wearing their uniforms," she whispered, as if speaking too loudly might break whatever spell had been cast overnight. "We are warriors preparing for battle," Nixara said with grave formality. "We wear our armor with honor." The lieutenant blinked several times, clearly trying to process this development. "Of course. Warriors. Naturally." The next hour passed in a blur of final preparations. The cubs practiced their formation drills, their movements precise and coordinated. They reviewed their academic presentations, their voices clear and confident. They helped each other with last-minute uniform adjustments, having developed their own morning ritual that incorporated elements of traditional Veltharian grooming with the practical requirements of academy dress code. Watching them, Kaya felt a surge of something she couldn't quite name. Pride, certainly, but also a deeper satisfaction, the kind that came from solving a problem that everyone else had been approaching from the wrong angle. "Inspection team arriving at Docking Bay 12, came the announcement over the station's communication system. "All personnel prepare for Galactic Council review." Commander Kolmoth straightened his own uniform and turned to address the cubs. "Remember, young ones, today you represent not just yourselves, but your species, your families, and this academy. Show them what you've learned." "We will, sir," the cubs replied in unison, their voices steady and sure. The inspection team entered the academy with the kind of pomp and circumstance that came standard with most governmental reviews. 3 officials in elaborate robes, 2 administrative assistants with portable recording equipment, and one individual who hung back slightly from the group. A tall, graceful Veltharian, whose presence made all 5 cubs suddenly stand even straighter. Kaya felt her heart skip a beat. Something about the way the cubs reacted to this particular inspector suggested there was more going on here than a routine educational review. "Honored inspectors," Commander Qualmoth began, launching into what was clearly a well-rehearsed welcome speech, "the Galactic Youth Academy is pleased to present our current class of interspecies cooperative learning participants." "Yes, yes," interrupted the lead inspector, a crystalline being whose faceted form caught and refracted the hall's lighting in distracting patterns. "We're here to evaluate compliance with institutional standards, not listen to promotional materials. Let us proceed with the assessment." What followed was perhaps the most thorough institutional examination Kaya had ever witnessed. The inspectors checked everything: academic progress, facility maintenance, dietary accommodations, recreational programming, and, of course, dress code compliance. The cubs performed flawlessly. They answered questions with intelligence and respect, demonstrated their academic achievements with quiet confidence, and maintained their perfect uniform standards throughout the entire proceedings. But Kaya noticed that their attention kept drifting to the Veltharian inspector, who observed everything with the kind of intense focus that suggested he was looking for something specific. "And these young Veltharians," the crystalline inspector said finally, turning to address the cubs directly, "you find the institutional requirements acceptable?" "We find them challenging, honored inspector," Nixara replied with diplomatic precision. "But we have learned that challenge leads to growth." "Indeed," the inspector made some notes on his datapad. "And the uniform requirements?" "We understand there were some initial difficulties with compliance." Kaya held her breath, wondering if this was where everything would fall apart. "The uniforms are an honor to wear," Felgen said, his young voice carrying absolute conviction. "They mark us as students, as beings brave enough to learn from other species. We wear them with pride." The inspector made more notes, his expression unreadable behind his crystalline features. "Fascinating. And who, exactly, helped you reach this understanding?" Commander Qualmoth opened his mouth to respond, but Veltano beat him to it. "Kaya, who fixes things, taught us," he said with the kind of simple honesty that cut through diplomatic doublespeak like a laser through tissue paper. "She showed us how to honor our traditions while serving our mission." Every eye in the room turned to Kaya, who suddenly felt very small and very human in a space full of important galactic personages. The Veltharian inspector's gaze was particularly intense, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that she was being evaluated for something she didn't understand. "Interesting," the inspector murmured, a maintenance engineer serving as cultural consultant. "Most irregular." "Sometimes," Kaya said, finding her voice despite the attention, "the best solutions come from the most unexpected places." The Veltharian inspector stepped forward, his movement fluid and predatory in a way that made Kaya's hindbrain start sending warning signals. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of authority that made everyone in the room stand a little straighter. "Young cubs," he said, addressing the group directly, "I am Inspector Kethral of the Veltharian Cultural Preservation Council. I have been sent here to evaluate whether this institution is capable of maintaining your cultural identity while providing adequate education." Cubs exchanged quick glances, and Kaya saw understanding dawn in their eyes. This hadn't been a random inspection. It had been a test. "In fact," Inspector Kethral continued, "your initial resistance to the uniform requirements was Not entirely spontaneous. You were instructed to resist until someone showed proper respect for your cultural needs. Commander Qualmoth made a sound like a reptile choking on its own tongue. You mean this entire crisis was planned? A test, Catherall confirmed. We needed to know if this academy could handle cultural sensitivity issues with wisdom rather than force. We needed to see if your staff could recognize that behavior problems often mask deeper emotional needs. He turned back to Kaya, his expression unreadable. What we did not expect was for a human maintenance worker to demonstrate the kind of cultural insight that our own diplomatic specialists often lack. Kaya felt heat rise in her cheeks. I listened to them. Really listened. It seemed pretty obvious once you got past all the shouting. Obvious, Catherall repeated, and there was something that might have been amusement in his voice. Yes, perhaps it should have been obvious, but wisdom often appears simple only in retrospect. He walked closer to the cubs, examining their uniforms with the kind of attention to detail that only someone from their own species could provide. You have learned to balance tradition with adaptation. This is not an easy lesson, even for adults. Kaya taught us that growing doesn't mean forgetting, Zafika said quietly. It means carrying the important things with you in new forms. Did she indeed? Catherall's tail, which Kaya hadn't noticed, was twitching with what she now recognized as barely contained approval, had gone completely still. And what do you think your families will say when they learn you've mastered this lesson? They'll be proud, Felgin said with absolute certainty. We kept our promise to learn and grow, and we never forgot who we are. Inspector Catherall turned to the lead crystalline inspector and nodded formally. The Veltharian Cultural Preservation Council finds this institution's handling of species-specific needs to be exemplary. We recommend continued accreditation with commendation. The crystalline inspector's faceted form flashed with what Kaya assumed was pleasure. Excellent! And the irregular consultation arrangements? Highly effective, Catherall replied. In fact, we would like to propose that maintenance engineer Kaya be offered a formal position as cultural integration specialist for this academy. The silence that followed was the kind that usually accompanied either great disasters or unexpected miracles. Kaya started, then stopped, genuinely speechless for perhaps the first time in her adult life. You don't have to answer now, Commander Qualmoth said quickly, his voice pitched somewhere between desperation and hope. Take time to consider. We could certainly use someone with your unique insights. Actually, Kaya said, looking around the room at the cubs who had taught her as much as she'd taught them, at the administrators who had been brave enough to try something different, at the inspector who had trusted her to get something important right, I think I'd like that very much. The cubs cheered, actual joyful cheering that echoed through the academy halls with the kind of pure happiness that made even the most cynical adult remember what it felt like to be young and full of possibilities. As the inspection team prepared to leave, Kaya found herself surrounded by 5 young Veltharians who looked nothing like the angry, defiant cubs she'd met just days before. They stood proud in their uniforms, confident in their identities, and ready to take on whatever challenges the galaxy might throw at them. So, Nixara said with a grin that showed just enough fang to remind everyone that Veltharians were still predators, even the teenage ones. What other problems need fixing around here? Kaya laughed, the sound carrying all the way down the corridor where maintenance crews were probably wondering what had gotten into their former colleague. Oh, I have a feeling we're just getting started. As the cubs dispersed to their afternoon classes, walking with the confident stride of beings who knew exactly who they were and where they belonged, Kaya caught sight of her reflection in one of the academy's polished wall panels. She looked exactly the same as she had that morning. Same work clothes, same tool belt, same human face in a galaxy full of more exotic features. But something fundamental had shifted. 3 months later, she would receive her first official case. A group of young aquatic dwellers who refused to use the Academy's atmospheric breathing apparatus, claiming it violated their spiritual connection to water. 6 months after that, it would be crystalline youngsters who insisted that the Academy's lighting spectrum was culturally offensive. A full cycle later, she'd be mediating between silicon-based adolescents and carbon-based teenagers who couldn't understand why they had to share laboratory space. Each case would teach her something new about the delicate balance between adaptation and identity, between fitting in and standing out, between honoring the past and embracing the future. She would become known throughout the sector as the human who could solve the unsolvable problems, not through force or regulation, but through the simple revolutionary act of treating young beings like the complex, worthy individuals they were. But all of that was still to come. Right now, in this moment, she was simply Kaya who fixes things, standing in an academy hallway, watching 5 proud young Veltharians head off to their next adventure. After all, the galaxy was full of young beings trying to figure out how to balance who they were with who they needed to become. And, apparently, Kaya had found her calling in helping them sort it out. Sometimes the best solutions really did come from the most unexpected places. And sometimes the most important job in the galaxy was simply knowing how to listen to someone who needed to be heard.